Welcome. Hello. Hi. Today we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to start today off with some GM prep. I have some work I got to do. And so, as such, there's going to be lots of hanging out and talking about Court of Swords. Now, if you're caught up on Court of Swords, obviously you have nothing to worry about. If you are a couple of episodes behind, there might be some... I'll try to avoid spoilers for anything relatively recent, but this is a GM prep stream, so ostensibly you're here to be spoiled on future things, right? You want to see behind the scenes as I prepare for what is to come, which is to say, a dungeon. And I'm gonna quote dungeon on there because I need to create a, how shall we say, threatening adventure environment. A horrific tunnel between a world of torment and suffering and its inverse. Anyway, we're going to be talking about both the general kind of world stuff of Court of Swords and Court of the Void, as we do when we do these kinds of streams. And then I'm going to be more specifically prepping for what I think the players are going to be doing. And this stream was prompted by a comment made by Dan, and I think he might even have made it a goal. Yeah. So they need to find a vein, either for their own material benefit or to escape this shadow realm that is the Court of the Void. So what we're going to do today is talk about what the veins are to get kind of a general idea of like what we're designing. We're going to take a look at a role-playing game that is not Dungeons & Dragons that has been a big inspiration, or I think will be a big inspiration for creating the vein. And then we need to talk about what the vein looks like. Like, what are we exactly building and doing here? And then we got to do it. So I think let's start today off by talking about some things that have been inspiring me lately, right? The last time when we talked about Court of the Void in general, I told you a little bit about Wraith being an inspiration for that world, right? This idea of the kind of shadowy reflection of the real world, the Shadowlands, like that whole thing. We talked about that being an inspiration. But particularly when we're talking about the veins and about kind of the world at large, there've been a couple of things that I've been kind of thinking about, and not just role-playing stuff. We'll certainly focus on that, but kind of where my head's been at with that game. Now, if you've tuned into any of this GM prep stuff before, you know that for me, usually what I'll do is the media that I consume, right? The music I listen to, the TV shows that I watch, are to some degree intentionally sources of inspiration for the games that I'm playing, right? So with a game like Mad Mage, it's not really, I don't really need inspiration for that. That is just like core classic D&D. The adventure is its own inspiration. I don't really need to like go looking. I've read Tombs of Adawan, right? I've read Red Nails. I don't need any more dungeon delving stuff. For Jace Beleren Must Die, you know, I've been paying a lot of attention to magic as a setting, kind of the same thing. But in games where I have to create the setting myself, I go looking for other stuff to inspire me. And a couple of days ago, I got a package in the mail that I've been waiting for a long time of something that has been a massive both visual and tonal inspiration for the Court of the Void, and will certainly inspire future stuff, and that is a new tarot deck that I got. So these are cards from the True Black tarot. This is like hands down the nicest tarot deck I have ever owned in my life. It is beautiful. It is shadowy and ominous. It is so cool. And if the Court of the Void ever adopted Heaven's order or wanted to invert it, this would 100% be the source of the imagery from that thing. So I've been looking at these cards a lot, kind of like just doing what you do with tarot and like holding them and looking at them and kind of like letting my brain as a GM kind of percolate over their imagery And so this cosmic void kind of thing has been a very big inspiration for me of late. And so will certainly be a continuing inspiration for the game, right? I'm kind of letting the magic of these things infuse my brain. So this has been a big inspiration for me, like visually, kind of getting an idea of like the tone and the setting of the Court of the Void in general. And then also I've been reading a lot of like philosophy of horror, and horror of philosophy like stuff. Like I started reading a book called Starry Speculative Void recently, and I just finished a book by Ligotti called Conspiracy Against the Human Race, which is this book about the idea that life is, well, I'll read you here. Let me find you the summary of antinatalism as a philosophy and kind of what it's been doing to my brain. So the religious aspect of this philosophy comes from an analysis of Buddhism, which is perfect. It lines up exactly with some of the stuff that I've been thinking about in terms of Court of Swords. But this is the sort of like subject of what I've kind of been thinking about. So this is a quote from an Indian scholar of Buddhism, and it says, Buddha states his propositions in the pedantic style of his age. He throws them into a form of stories, but as such, it's logically faulty. All the Buddha wishes to convey is this: oblivious to the suffering to which life is subject, man begets children, and thus the cause of old age and death. If he would only realize what suffering he would add to by his act, he would desist from the procreation of children, and so stop the operation of old age and death. Right, and this sort of truth, I think, exists as part of, in Court of Swords, as part of the like grand lie of heaven, right? Heaven's whole thing is that life begets suffering for the people that live in the Court of Swords, live in that world, the world. It begets suffering for them so that their soul can be purified. Human life suffering is a way to polish the soul so that it might be worthy to rejoin the fountain. And as a result, making the choice to have children, to procreate in that world, means spiritually you are creating another opportunity to fully like polish the soul diamond as it prepares for its journey into the fountain. But you're also creating a life of suffering, because that is the purpose of existing under heaven's rule, right? So I've been thinking about what the Court of the Void represents and what the Mara represent in terms of rejecting that idea of taking what heaven's plan for the human soul is and flipping it on its ear, right? Because the Mara, they functionally have two spheres in which they operate. The first being the Court of the Void itself, their home terrain, this kind of shadowy, maybe prison that they can't escape from, maybe a realm of their birth from which they cannot survive outside of. There is something about the Court of the Void that the Mara are attached to. Otherwise, they would simply go into the world and pursue their agenda, which is to say, the upending of heaven, the perhaps the snuffing out of the fountain, perhaps the alteration of its plan. Right? Maybe the Mara have this idea for the world that doesn't quite fit that structure. So let's take a quick look at my garbage map of the universe. I am admittedly like pretty terrible at drawing, so I will share with you my garbagey map, and you can kind of see what we're working with. So this is a map I threw together a couple of GM prep sessions ago that kind of illustrates the world, and I'm not going to go over every detail of it again, right? We're not going to renew it. If you are looking at this and you're like, this is interesting, this is some cool looking garbage, what does this mean? Go back and watch the earlier Court of the Void prep stuff, because I walk through this, I draw it basically. But essentially it sets up the plane, right? It sets up the setting for our game, right? We have heaven above, powered by the fountain, shines its light down on the world, which is this blue disc, shines its light down on the world, creating a shadow below it, which is the Court of the Void, under which is darkness. And then all this orange shit is stuff outside of the realm of our existence. We don't really need to worry about that right now because we're primarily focused on these little green lines, which is to say the veins. This is what the people of the Court of the Void call it. This is what vein hunters go hunting for. Let's start talking about what a vein in this context might be. So let's talk about that. Let's start a new document, and we'll make some notes as to what the veins are. So veins and the opportunity vein in particular. So, what is a vein? A vein is a tunnel between the world and the Court of the Void, right? So this is again one of my main rules in doing any kind of like world expanding or world understanding of the setting of our campaign. One of my rules is that everything spiritual is physical and everything physical is spiritual, right? The corpus of the body is not mere meat, but is, as with everything in reality, the embodiment and the physical manifestation of the fountain's pure energy. Or in the case of the Court of the Void, the shadowy substance that is cast by that energy, right? The not the absence, but the reflection of that energy. Anyway, so everything in the game's world is both spiritual and physical. Heaven is a physical place. Go ahead and get that song out of your head. So heaven is a place you can travel to, right? Hell is a neighborhood of heaven. The Court of the Void is a place. The world is real. You can touch your soul, etc. Right? So a vein literally is a physical tunnel between the world and the Court of the Void, of varying intensity, size, and quality. Right? So as a physical thing, it is a way for both energy, metaphysical energy, right, and physical matter to travel between the world, which is to say our campaign setting, and the Court of the Void, the dark reflection of our campaign setting where the characters are currently at. Metaphysically, a vein is a lapse in the security between the Court of the Void and the world, caused by either natural in quotes, in the sense that everything is natural, right? Even human meddling is a form of nature, but caused by either natural phenomena, let's call it unintentional phenomena, right? Psychic trauma, evil actions, etc., right? Or caused by intentional meddling. The actions of the Mara, their servants, bad faith prayer on the parts of humanity, right? And again, remember, when I say humanity, I mean anything that has the dual soul. I could mean humans, I could mean Gaja, I could mean, right? I can mean a bunch of different stuff. But there are two ways that a vein can be, meta-humanity, mortals, whatever. Humanity meaning like things that have souls that heaven cares about. The animals don't have those souls developed to a point where they can't, like a dog can't open a portal to the Court of the Void. Unless somehow it was a very special dog. So, yeah, maybe my dog can't. Hell dog might be able to. So it is a lapse in the security between those things. Now, when I talk about security, this is a word I'm choosing on purpose because when I say security, I mean that there is some kind of intelligent, pseudo-intelligent, or otherwise intentional force that keeps the two planes separated for a specific, if unclear, purpose. Right? So the imporous nature of that barrier between the worlds, right? There is this space in here, this barrier space. It's there for a reason, and we don't know what that reason is. We don't know who created that, whether it's intentional or unintentional, but it exists, and the veins represent a lapse or a break in that barrier, right? That's a mystery, one of the setting's mysteries, right? And I think that when you create a campaign setting, and certainly this is true for me, maybe it's not true for you, but when you create a campaign setting, it's important to recognize the mysteries of the setting. Far Verona has setting mysteries, right? What is Verona? What is the truth about the serpent's assassin? How much corn can a single acre employee eat before they die? Right? There are mysteries built into the setting. This is one of those. So that's important, right? This idea that there is a barrier, there's an impenetrable barrier. Now, this barrier is one way, two ways. We're not sure yet. We're not here to decide the nature of the barrier. We know its purpose, right? The purpose of the barrier, and I guess we can make a note of this as well. The purpose of which may be the bars of metaphysical prison, the outer cell wall of a spiritual organism, whatever, right? Something like that. This sort of impermeable barrier. Maybe it goes both ways. Maybe some stuff can go one way, maybe not. We'll learn it as we go. How much of the general idea of this multiverse stuff did you have before starting Court of Swords? Like bits and pieces here and there. I plant seeds and then I come back and harvest them later, right? Some of this is new. Some of this is me just harvesting and finalizing little bits. So anyway, what else is a vein, right? A vein is a source of what the denizens of the Court of the Void call juice. What is juice? Right? So we've learned this a little as we watch. So juice being the colloquial name for, again, the physical is spiritual, the spiritual is physical. So pseudo-manifested spiritual leakage, radiation, actual fluid, various manifestations in the real world, in corporeality, right? Pseudo-manifested spiritual leakage from the fountain through the barrier, right? Valuable because, let's get that, valuable because it allows true change to occur in the Court of the Void, as well as being a potent source of power and energy. Much desired by the Mara for whatever reason, and others, right? The juice. Now, the juice is like, it's nothing. It's nothing to people from the world. But in a place where that energy is absent. Because again, this is like okay, so let's make a comic book analogy. The world is Krypton. And in the Court of the Void, if you went there, you might be some form of Superman simply because of the ambient energy of the place being different and weaker than what you are used to. Though juice is more like heroin than it is like kryptonite. It would be like if kryptonite got people on Earth high and gave them superpowers. Right? If you could crush it up and snort kryptonite and it would like fuck you up and make you like powerful, then that would be more like the stuff. So that's juice, right? I am extremely curious to see, just as a matter of like my own personal stuff, what would happen if a denizen of the void were to find a vein through which they could traverse entirely. What would be required to do that, right? So that's a stakes question, I guess. Let's start a list of those. So stakes questions, again, if you're not familiar with the term, these are straight from Apocalypse World. They are things that we ask ourselves as game masters about the game and about the game's world that we would like to learn through play, right? We're playing to find out what happens, and these are the things that we want to find out. So how could it be possible for a denizen of the void, which I will shorten because the void is a place, but I don't want to keep saying Court of the Void. I guess I probably should, just to keep them separate. How could it be possible for the denizen of the Court of the Void to traverse the vein entirely and bodily, and what would it be like for them in the world, right? How would that happen? What would it be like? What would they need? How would they have to change? And what would it be like when they arrive in the world, right? What would it be like for them? How would they change? In addition, the idea here of like the Mara, right? What is the barrier between the worlds? Who created it? What is its purpose? And to that end, why can the Mara only project through it, but not traverse it directly? Why can the Mara not simply use their power to sunder it entirely? And then, pursuant to that, is that something they want? What is the Mara's agenda? I don't know. I'm not sure. We can think about it. We can think about it more as we go. So, a vein is a source of what the denizens of the Court of the Void call juice, as well as artifacts and miscellanea from the world that happen to fall through the cracks. Physically, the vein in the Court of the Voids, in the Court of the Void, they are represented by mystical interference, strange lights, sounds, and colors. Sometimes a physical thing, physical place or thing, right? A single room, a network of halls, an entire city. They are temporary and unpredictable. And to this end, let's talk about this. Let's make a note here. To that end, they're inspired by Roadside Picnic, right? By Stalker, right? The zone within Stalker, Roadside Picnic. A place where like weird stuff happens, but where you can get good shit. And that's on the Court of the Void side, right? These veins sometimes open And in the Court of the Void, they manifest as like the color out of space. They're not always physical. Sometimes a vein manifests emotionally, right? A vein might be represented by an entire village or town or people kind of like losing their mind temporarily. That can be a vein as well, you know. It really depends on kind of how that looks. So in the court, in the world, right? It's much more straightforward. Haunted places, cursed locales, places where the dead refuse to stay that way, defiled temples, unholy space, right? Dungeons, etc. In the world, veins tend to manifest much more clearly and obviously. So let's make a note here of kind of what that might be inspired by. So for me, this would be like any ghost story, any magic circle type shit. What's the name of Area X? Right, from Annihilation. That kind of deal. And yeah, to answer your question, like when Ramus Critical failed that religion, I think it was a religion check. Yeah, exactly. He opened a vein, which allowed the void's corruption or whatever to bleed through and to animate the dead. Yeah, and I think Chrome Viper, that's a great point, right? Like the Bermuda Triangle. We have these stories of unholy places where it's not about so think about it this way. The veins are a one directional process. They're a sucking wound in the spiritual space of the universe. There is no such thing as like void energy that goes up. All energy flows down in this universe, right? And to that end, you know, the transfer of energy in the universe is from the fountain through the prism of heaven, reflected down to the world, shadowed by the void, and pulled into it ultimately, right? There is that subset of people that believe that the void is the ultimate destination of all energy in the universe, right? That it's not about the fountain. Again, and we talked about this the first time, but if you notice, right, like the soul has two parts, a lower and an upper. The universe, as a reflection of the soul, is the fountain, the Hun of the universe, is the void the Po of the universe. Maybe it is, if you subscribe to a humanocentric idea. But before there were humans, we had the primordials, and the primordials weren't divided in this way. They weren't split up. There was no yin and yang. There was only the way, right? There was only existence. So I don't know. We don't know that for sure yet. And there are other entities like the Farang who don't have this soul thing. They're unified in their physical, physio-spiritual existence. So anyway, the point is that energy flows down even though travel up is possible. And this isn't like physical up, this is spiritual up. But this is just the orientation that we need to understand kind of how this shit works. So if we look at a vein can only open one way. So think about it this way. Necrotic energy in the world is related to the Court of the Void and related to the Void itself, not by the fact that it is energy, but the fact that it is a lack of energy, right? If, for example, Ramus casts Inflict Wounds, right? Let's imagine Ramus casts Inflict Wounds. He conjures the spell, he touches his enemies and they are harmed by necrotic damage. That's not a form of energy. Necrotic isn't a thing. What he's doing is he is evacuating the space around his hands. He's evacuating that space of the energy of the fountain. He's creating an absence that he can then use to harm people's physio-spiritual energy. Right, so it's like creating a gap in the fountain's ambient energy field and using that gap to harm people. Kind of like how how a vacuum can hurt you, right? So it's about an absence. Yeah, cold is the absence of heat. Right, you got it exactly. It's not energy in the sense that it is a thing that it exists. It is a hole in an otherwise healthy energy field, which is to say the light of the fountain that is profuse throughout the universe. So if you are in the world and you go into one of these haunted places, right? If you find your way into the Vane's reflection in the world, what you're really doing is you're going into a place not that has some kind of negative, not that has some kind of like bad radiation, but you're going into a place that lacks what you need to exist. This kind of base level lack of the spiritual stuff of the universe. And I guarantee that there are members of, I don't know which like church it would be, maybe the Magician, that have protocols and devices for like finding this stuff and for detecting it. Yeah, it is an absence of soul energy, and as a result, because the soul and the body, the physical and the spiritual, are linked, these places, that absence is harmful. It can fuck you up, right? So to a degree, if we take a step back, right, possibly the largest and most diffuse vein that exists in the world is the Court of Swords. Right? Yeah, exactly. The vein hunters are like magic astronauts, are going to a terrible place. So the Court of Swords itself has become this diffuse wasteland. Because of the influence of the Mara through their agent, the Necromancer King, into this universe, has diffused and dissipated and created this kind of vacuum Chernobyl. Yeah, that's right. It's 3 Mile Island, but it's spread out through an area as big as, Southeast Asia, right? So in a way, I wonder how the Court of Swords presages the future of a world where that barrier is erased, right? If the barrier between the Court of the Void, if the shadow and the real were ever to be united, if we pull that curtain back, what would happen to the world, right? Is that the Mara's plan? Is that what they want? Do they want to yank back the barrier? If so, what would happen? Is the Court of Swords just an experiment? Is it a hole poked in the permeable barrier big enough that the spiritual? Because again, remember, it's created, right? A vein is created by either unintentional phenomena or intentional meddling, or both, right? In this case, there was a soldier who came back from war, who was psychically traumatized by it, right? Creating a tiny localized vein in that person's, fountain energy sphere, in their aura, right? Creating a personalized vein, giving the Mara access to that person through that vein, by which they can manipulate them to intentionally meddle, right? To begin killing priests, knocking down churches, breaking up heaven's protective equipment that keeps that region, those regions separated, right? That enforces the power of the fountain, which then creates more psychic trauma, which creates unintentional phenomena, which is to say bad worship, which creates more intentional meddling, right? The giving up of heaven's protocols, the rejection of the fountain's power, which then causes more unintentional phenomena in the natural world, which eventually leads us to this place where the Court of Swords itself is a diffuse and massive vein. Now, the veins are not one-to-one, right? Let's take a look at our diagram here. Now, a vein is not a one-to-one representation. It's not as if the vein is this big on one end and this big on the other, right? The vein is not a cylinder. In some ways, the vein is a funnel, right? It might be that the Court of Swords, which has become this diffuse vein, is enormous, but the vein's entry is localized on the other end, right? And in the same way, a vein might represent a much larger influence of heaven's energy on one end, but might be the soul of a single person on the other end, right? This vacuum, and this is how you get these sort of void messiahs, these people like the Necromancer King, where ideally this is how it looks, unless you're a Mara, right? So like the person who benefits is the person at the thin end of the vein. Right? Okay, so again, let me give you an example. So there is a single Mara in the Court of the Void. This is our Court of Swords model, right? There's a single Mara. Yeah. Well, we'll go through. I'll go through it a little bit more slowly. So okay, so there's a single Mara in the Court of the Void that is the patron of the Necromancer King, right? So this is that person. This is the Mara. This is the narrow end of the vein funnel. This Mara has this entire vein of influence and gets all the juice flowing into them. They are very, very powerful because the whole Court of Swords is they're sucking from heaven's teat, and it's only for them, right? Now, inversely, if someone in the real world, and I don't know if this has ever happened, it might happen, if someone in the real world were able to draw on a massive vein on the other side, if they were able to do that, but to keep their end more or less closed, internalizing themselves, this is how you get like a level 20 warlock, right? They could funnel all of that energy. They could that lack of energy, right? They could use that for themselves. Yeah, the foci is the person harvesting the energy. And again, remember the arrows on this really look like this. Because as we've seen in spells that channel necrotic energy, obviously a lack of fountain can be empowering. And this comes back to the idea of death, right? Death is central to the difference between the world and the void. In the world, death is what gives heaven its power. That cycle of the reboot, that idea of reincarnation, the polishing of souls, the great and fundamental project of heaven is what powers their worship. It's what gives them their influence. Now, there's no death. There's no death in the Court of the Void, right? There is nothing happens when you die. You wait and you come back. So avoiding death in the world gives you power. Being able to kill or permanently change things in the Court of the Void gives you power. Right? And so this is sort of the thing. If we're really looking at it, what differentiates the two is stasis, right? In the Court of the Void, stasis rules. The status is very definitely quo. On the flip side of that, in the actual world, in the world, we have change, right? Change is the only constant. And in that world, the most important form of change is death, right? Death is the most significant change. Physical change, right? Mountains moving, rivers moving, cities being blown up, forests burning, forests being grown, desertification. Like, none of that is as significant as death, because death is tied to the soul. And the soul is the fundamental aspect of the fountain. So, that's why the veins are important. That's why the veins matter, right? When we kind of look at that, and this barrier between these places is what keeps true stasis and true change in place. And yeah, like this is a really good observation. Chrome Viper and Zandivia both notice this. When you live in a world, and this is sort of I'm going to badly draw a yin yang here, but when you live in a world that is defined by specific qualities, right? So like, if your world is one way, right? If your world is black or white, at the heart of your desire is the thing you don't have. So the void demands change. And heaven, in its ultimate plan, demands stasis. And the two are eternally at each other's throats because of that idea. And this kind of goes back to the Buddhist thought of the setting that existence is suffering, desire is suffering. And that's true, whether you believe heaven or not. That's true for everybody, right? They all want what they can't have. And those things are harmful, fundamentally harmful to them. Like, change is desirable in the court of the void if you ever want to build anything or do anything permanent, but it's also the only way you can die for real. It's the only way you can end your story. And in the world, the only way to avoid suffering is not to die, right? People want to protect themselves from that, but the story that's told to them by heaven is that suffering is beneficial. That's the way that we cover that dynamic cycle. It's the way that heaven teaches us to be okay with dying and with suffering. When your beloved husband is stabbed through the heart by bandits, to prevent you from getting sucked down into the cataclysm of that tragedy and then sucking down your relatives and your loved ones into this like horrific chain reaction of death and misery, you can cut that off by believing what heaven says, that like, oh, this is natural and good. It was their fate to be stabbed in the heart by bandits. I'm okay. I feel comfortable with that. Not, I'm going to throw myself off a bridge. And then your family throws themselves off a bridge because they miss you so much. And then their family and friends throw themselves off a bridge, causing a cascading reaction of misery and suffering. Heaven teaches us death is good. Right? So it's kind of where we're at. So the void and the world are separated except by the veins. And the veins are what allow us to break the rules of our world. Whether the veins are the physical vein that we've seen, or whether they're more metaphysical, or whether they're the simplified absence of energy, right? Casting Chill Touch is opening a tiny focused vein. So, how does any of that matter, right? How does any of that matter? The purpose of all of this stuff is so that I have something to put in front of my players, right? This is the kind of world building that if you don't connect it to actual shit in your game, you are just wasting your time. right? You're just wasting your time because none of this matters until we have a context for it. So let's talk about context, right? The opportunity vein. Now we've got basically two veins that have come up in conversation. There is the vein around which the Necropolis opportunity is built. And there is this other vein that is doomed to open, meant to open. We don't know, right? So the opportunity vein, and then we'll call it the aorta claim because aorta knows about it. Let's make some notes. So let's start defining these funnel shapes. So the opportunity vein is a world. How do we want to define these? A top-down vein. And then the aorta claim is meant to be a bottom-up, or bottom-up vein. Wide at the bottom. So the opportunity vein is big on top, meaning it's a big source of energy. We don't know what it looks like. We haven't seen the opportunity vein in real life, but it's not the Court of Swords. It's probably some like haunted castle or some fucked up temple or something we haven't seen before. And this is a lens that takes a wide image of the fountain's energy and funnels it down. It is a top-down vein, meaning it is big in the world, small manifestation. Let's call it limited manifestation in the Court of the Void, right? Okay. This one is a bottom-up vein, which means it is large manifestation in the Court of the Void, limited access point in the world. Now, let's talk about distillation, shall we? I'm going to pop over to that map for a second. We'll talk about distillation. Because I think, as the newspaper pointed out, concentrate, right? Concentrate. So if you have a vein that is small on top and big on the bottom, you're going to get an intense source of fountain energy, but it's going to be pretty diffuse. It's going to come out the other end much bigger. Parts per million, right? ppm here. Right? This is an alchemical process when we think about it this way, but it's a physio-spiritual process when we think about it in terms of the universe, right? So it's like ppm, right? If we get a high concentrate, it will diffuse into the void that way. If we have a big vein on the top, we get a lot of source, right? A lot of fountain energy traveling in, and it's distilled into a hyper-focused power source. This is why the Court of Swords and the Mara that controls the Necromancer King is so important, right? Because it's the biggest vein that exists in the world, and it is funneling the most possible energy. Right? So this is the vein, this is the aorta vein, and this is the opportunity vein. So we'll talk about Nightmare Incursions when we get into actually building it. I've got some inspiration. We'll talk about it. So yeah, so the aorta claim is a bottom-up vein, large manifestation in the void, limited access point in the world. It hasn't opened yet. Still in the process of being divined, right? So they'll need a diviner to find it. The opportunity vein is well understood, stable, more or less permanent. It is not under clear or obvious control, right? The trinity of Mara in opportunity are fighting over / sharing it, right? Imagine if post-war Berlin were also a plutonium mine. Right? Like imagine those two things were were connected. So it's not under clear or obvious control, but is highly secured, reasonably well understood. I already wrote that. Okay, highly secured by a conglomerate of forces under tension. Right? Shared but not shared. So there's a stakes question, right? From chat. How do we close veins? We know that piety and prayer counter the Mara, but are there specific and, more importantly, functional rituals? Cleansing, exorcism, etc. I think there are. I think that, but heaven wouldn't think about it that way, right? It's more of like a spirit and like hearts and minds kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So let's talk about these claims. So the opportunity vein we know more about, right? It's secured by these forces under tension. And then the aorta claim, we don't really know anything about it yet. Somewhere in the vicinity, stability and core nature are as yet undefined. So here's the thing. I talked about this a little bit when I did my prep, my like prep lecture for the Roleplay Patreon. I could, if I wanted to, prep two separate veins, right? I could be like, here's the opportunity vein. It is X, Y, and Z. Here's the aorta claim. It's A, B, and C. Whichever one they pick, that's the one. But I'm going to galaxy brain this thing, and I'm going to just create one, and then whichever one they go to, that's the one. And then if I need to create the other one, I can do that in a separate prep session. There's no point in making two separate dungeons when I can make one, and then whichever they go to, we just build enough that it still sticks, right? Because it's still a vein. That way I don't have to spend twice as much time for half as much content, right? I can focus. So, I guess let's talk about like challenges to the PC, because that's what you want, right? In a game, tension is the most important thing. So the opportunity vein, let's make this a bigger heading, because I need to start making like subheadings here. So let's do this at like let's do this guy at like 18, and then we'll do some like some 14s below that. Formatting. All right, so challenges. There we go. Okay, I'll copy that. All right, so challenges for these particular veins. Obviously, nope. Go back to your normal size, please. There we go. Secured by hostile forces. Deep in enemy territory. Also, has anybody figured out the relationship between the veins and whatever the fuck is going on with Ramus? Right? You starting to understand kind of what's happening there? Because remember, the Mara really don't care about the world. They want to fuck with heaven. Heaven is the true enemy. And they can't access it because they're not. You're figuring it out. All right. So it's deep in enemy territory, secured by hostile forces. It is Yeah, I think that's the main challenge here, right? Is like it's an enemy base. You're sneaking in to a secured checkpoint between worlds. The Aorta claim challenges are competition from Vein Hunters, right? There's going to be competition from Vein Hunters. There's going to be unknowns, right? Potentially far away, unstable, or more dangerous to access. Limited throughput, right? We don't know. They're underinformed about this one. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, for folks who are need a little refresher and who are interested in kind of debating the Ramus situation, Ramus is a person who, as a person, used to have a soul, and a soul is what we refer to the two-part nature of existence, right? He had an upper soul given to him by heaven. He had a lower soul, which is the cruft that accumulates dharma in the world and then is shed as you learn your life lesson and are reincarnated. Ramus's upper soul is currently in an ape, I believe. Ramus has been reincarnated as an ape, but Ramus's body has had a surrogate Mara-created soul jammed into him by way of whatever Mara currently controls the Court of the Void vein. And that Mara was capable of creating this fake soul because of all that power, right? So Ramus is like a person Mara hybrid something or other. You know what? Let me give you an analogy that I think you might like. So, in order to exist in the world, you need to have a spirituo-physical shell of flesh, right? You need to have a spiritual physical shell of flesh around your soul that allows you to thrive off of the ambient energy of the universe, right? Thrive and survive. It is a shell through which you photosynthesize, in a way, spiritual photosynthesize the magic of the universe. So you need that to exist. The Mara can't really create those things, right? They don't have that power. The people that live in the Court of the Void are not made up of that same energy. Their shell doesn't quite work the same way. If you don't have a soul, your shell starts to slowly dissolve as it folds in on itself, right? As the hungry ghost within you consumes it. You ever seen a little movie called Terminator? You ever seen Terminator? So to send someone back in time, it only works on flesh, right? They can only send humans back in time with their fucking Terminator time machines for some stupid reason because they need flesh. So what did Skynet do? They made robots encased in flesh, sent them back in time. Ramus is the Court of Swords' spiritual equivalent of like the T-800. So that's kind of where Ramus is at right now. He might also be a weapon. He might also be a key. He may be the battering ram for the doors of heaven. We'll see. But Ramus is kind of the Court of the Void's Terminator, more or less. So that's a whole thing. Yeah.